Assalamu alaikum. In every Western country, Australia, UK, Canada, US, these English-speaking Western countries, there are these Muslim useful idiots that the government or sometimes right-wing media outlets, right-wing racist organizations like to use and exploit and use against Islam and Muslims. In Australia, you have Imam Tawhidi. In the UK, you have Majid Nawaz and Taj Hargi. In Canada, in the US, you've got too many. In Canada, we've got Tariq Fateh. So basically in Canada, anytime there's an issue that might relate to the civil rights of Muslims, any kind of positive development that might be good for Islam and Muslims, Tariq Fateh will be there. Except that he won't be on the side of Muslims. He will always be against Muslims and against Islam, time and time again. So a couple of months ago, Tariq Fateh spoke at some kind of a conference here in Toronto called Ideacity 2019. It should have been called Idiot City, because again, Tariq Fateh really is a useful idiot for the right-wing, ultra-nationalist, anti-immigrant type of people. So let's have a look and see what Tariq Fateh had to say at this conference.
Quality has to count, integrity, honesty. If you have an opinion, you can't be a reporter because you do not have the capacity. It takes a lot of strength to be objective, to distance yourself from your opinion and report the facts.
So Tariq Fateh here says that you shouldn't let your opinion or your prejudices get in the way of reporting the facts. If you're a journalist, if you're a reporter, your job is to be objective and to report things as they are. This sounds very good. Let's see if Tariq Fateh actually does that.
So now we're going to have, I don't know why the Catholics don't want Catholic law. What's happened to the good Catholics? Nothing, believe me. 300 Catholics died in Colombo, and Canada was mourning who? The 50 who died in Christchurch.
Tariq Fateh says that 300 Catholics were killed in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Of course, you all remember Colombo, the Easter bombings in the 3 Catholic churches. The only thing is the number was not 300. It wasn't 300 Catholics. It was 259. As of the most updated number, 259 people were killed in the Colombo, Sri Lankan bombings. Not all 259 of them were Catholics. There were non-Catholics, there were non-Christians who were killed as well. There were even, believe it or not, Muslim victims in the bombings in Colombo, Sri Lanka. So for example, there was Razina Khader, there was MHM Ibrahim, there was 8-year-old Zayan Chaudhry, there was Yigit Ali Kavus from Turkey, there was Ahmad Zainal Jafri, there was Hani Majid Uthman. So it was not 300 Catholics who were killed, 259 people were killed, almost just as bad, and not all of them were Catholics, although of course the majority of them were.
Guy who had admired the People's Republic of China as his model goes to a mosque and kills 50 Muslims in Christchurch.
So here Tariq is referencing the Christchurch, New Zealand shooter who went into a mosque in New Zealand and killed 50 Muslim worshippers. For some curious reason, Tariq Fateh mentions here that the Christchurch shooter, who I'm not going to name, looked up to China as a role model. I'm not sure why he would mention this fact. I read the manifesto by the Christchurch shooter and he only mentions China 3 times. 2 of those times is not relevant to the discussion at all. There's only one reference to China which is in any way relevant to his motivations for wanting to go into a mosque and shoot Muslims. In other words, there's only one reference to China that I can think of that Tariq Fateh might be thinking of. That reference in his manifesto is where he says, "The nation with the closest political and social values to my own is the People's Republic of China." But keep in mind that the Christchurch shooter, like a lot of these shooters, had a lot of muddled thinking, a lot of confused thoughts, and there's a lot of people that he was inspired by. Most of all, he was inspired by the ideology of white supremacism. So for example, he said, Sir Oswald Mosley is the person from history closest to my own beliefs. Who is Sir Oswald Mosley? Well, he was a white British fascist during World War II times. He was the president of the British Union of Fascists. Why didn't Tariq Fateh see fit to mention that as well? The Christchurch shooter also said Donald Trump is a symbol of renewed white identity. So the shooter explicitly said that he looks up to Donald Trump as a symbol of renewed white identity. Why would Tariq Fateh mention China and not mention this? Could it be because he's talking to an all-white audience as usual? Could it be that the majority of the people that are sitting in his audience are white and he doesn't want to offend them? The Christ shooter also mentioned that the person that most radicalized him, and he actually used that word radicalized, was Candace Owens. Candace Owens is a right-wing conservative political commentator in the United States. Why didn't Tariq Fateh mention this? The Christchurch shooter has even mentioned environmentalism as one of the motivations of his actions and his ideology. He even referred to himself as an eco-terrorist. So here you have a white terrorist that uses the word terrorist in application to himself, and yet there are still people like Tariq Fateh who would hesitate to use the word terrorist when it's in regards to anyone other than a Muslim. The Christchurch shooter also used the word radicalized in reference to himself. He said that I'm radicalized by the views of Candace Owens. Yet again, people like Tariq Fateh who have an axe to grind with Islam and Muslims, they would still hesitate to use the word radical or radicalized, even when this radicalized white terrorist is himself using the word radicalized in application in reference to himself.
The same week, the same few days apart, an ISIS fellow, an entire, about 20 people go to every Catholic church in Colombo and slaughter 300 Catholics.
Just about everything Tariq Fateh says in this sentence is factually wrong. First of all, the Colombo Sri Lankan bombings did not happen in the same week or after 1 week after the Christchurch mosque shooting. The Christchurch mosque shooting happened on March 15th, 2019. The Colombo Sri Lankan church bombings happened on April 21st, 2019. So it was not the same week. It was more like a month and a week later, not the same week. The other thing that Tariq Fateh says, and you could think that this is just a slip because he's a 70-year-old senile man, but when you follow Tariq Fateh's career for as long as I have, you know that he does this stuff on purpose. He said that, well, firstly he said 20 ISIS people, 20 Muslim terrorists went into the Catholic churches. Well, it wasn't 20, it was 9 suicide bombers that carried out the attacks. Not that this makes a big difference. What does make a difference is when he says that these attackers went into every Catholic church in Colombo, Sri Lanka. No, they went into 3 churches. Those churches were St. Sebastian's Church, Zion Church, and St. Anthony's Shrine. That's 3 Catholic places of worship. When I looked this up on Google, there were more than 20 Catholic churches in Colombo, Sri Lanka. There's a big difference between 3 churches and 20 plus Catholic churches. There's around 23 Catholic churches in Colombo, Sri Lanka. So it's 3 churches that were attacked, not 23. How did Tariq Fateh get that all of the Catholic churches in Colombo, Sri Lanka were attacked? And again, it was not 300 death toll, it was 259, and all of them were not Catholics, although the majority of them were, and it still remains just as large and just as bad of a tragedy. Let's move on.
What news do you think appeared prominent in Toronto? Now, let's put it this way. Christchurch is closer to Toronto or Colombo? Take a guess. I'm not asking for the geography majors here. Colombo!
Colombo! So here Tariq Fateh's point, and again, this is a very childish point. I don't think that we should get caught up in these kinds of details, but Tariq Fateh's point is that Colombo, Sri Lanka is closer to Toronto than Christchurch, New Zealand. In other words, the Toronto media should have been more concerned with the Catholic deaths in Sri Lanka on account of the fact that Colombo, Sri Lanka is closer to Toronto, meaning geographically, physically closer to Toronto than is Christchurch, New Zealand. The problem with that is that when you look up these distances on Google, which I did, Toronto to Christchurch, New Zealand is 14,401 kilometers. Toronto to Colombo, Sri Lanka is 14,000 kilometers. In other words, the difference is just of 400 kilometers. Now, I don't think anybody walks from Toronto to either one of these places. Nobody swims from Toronto to either one of these places. You take a fast airliner plane to these places. When a plane is traveling at 800 kilometers to 900 kilometers per hour, that means the difference from Toronto to Colombo versus Toronto to Christchurch, New Zealand is that of 25 minutes flying time. So on Tariq Fateh's logic, because there's a 25-minute difference in the flying time from Toronto to Colombo versus Toronto to Christchurch, on account of that, the Toronto media should have emphasized more on the tragedy in Colombo, Sri Lanka. The other problem with this is, and Tariq Fateh is very clever in this way, is that why did he choose Toronto? Why did he say Toronto to Christchurch? Why did he say Toronto to Colombo? Why didn't he just say Canada in general? Because he knew that if he said Canada in general, then from British Columbia, which is our westernmost province, Christchurch, New Zealand is actually closer to Vancouver than is Colombo, Sri Lanka. Vancouver to Christchurch, New Zealand is only 11,967 kilometers. Vancouver to Colombo is 13,255 kilometers. So that wouldn't have worked for Tariq Fateh, which is why he didn't say which one is closer to Canada. He said which one is closer to Toronto. Another obvious reason that the Western media, including Toronto media and Canadian media, may have been more preoccupied with the New Zealand massacre is because we didn't expect it to happen. New Zealand is such a peaceful country that we don't expect that a crazy gunman would go into a mosque and kill 50 Muslim worshippers in cold blood. Sri Lanka, on the other hand, unfortunately, has been embroiled in a civil war for the longest time. Between 1983 to 2004, which is not long ago, more than 150,000 Sri Lankans have died in the civil war in that country, which, by the way, has nothing to do with religion. In fact, the Sri Lankan military, basically the government, is responsible for killing at least 40,000 Tamil separatists or suspected Tamil separatists. So that's yet another reason that we were more shocked by New Zealand, and perhaps the Canadian media emphasized more on the events in Christchurch, New Zealand.
They didn't, because everyone had to go back and fight for their votes. Because white people don't have tribes anymore. So you don't go around Queen Street saying, well, it's time for the Orange Order to beat up the Irish Catholics in Cabbagestown. No, it doesn't happen. You've grown up. Now we have tribes that make sure that in a great city of Bramptonistan, every liberal is a Sikh and every conservative is a Hindu. This is what you've created.
Okay, so Tariq Fateh says basically white people don't suffer from tribalism. This is just something that afflicts foreigners and immigrants from the third world, Muslim immigrants presumably. But do you really think the Orange Order of Canada doesn't also vote along particular lines? I mean, historically, fine, they're not very relevant anymore, but the Orange Order of Canada historically has had members that voted predominantly for the Conservative Party of Canada. In fact, there have been some very preeminent Canadian politicians, lawyers, things like that, who were part of the Orange Order, and pretty much all of them were members of the Conservative Party of Canada. So are you sure that white ethnic groups or white linguistic groups don't vote along certain party lines? Is it only Hindus or Sikhs that do that? Are you sure that French Canadians don't have a tendency of voting along certain party lines? How many English people do you think vote for the Parti Québécois, for example? Also, if you think that tribalism doesn't afflict white people, what do you make of English Canada versus French Canada? In 1995, this is not that long ago, this is 25 years ago, there was a referendum in Quebec which asked Quebecers, i.e. French Canadians, if they want to separate from the rest of Canada. The no side, fortunately for Canada, the no side won, but they won by 50.58% of the vote. Just think about that. 50.58% of the vote was no, and that's the only reason that French Canada, i.e. Quebec, didn't separate from the rest of English Canada. And interestingly, Jacques Parizeau, who was the head of the Parti Québécois, after losing this referendum vote, he said that they lost this referendum vote due to the ethnic vote.
C'est vrai qu'on a été battu au fond par quoi? Par l'argent puis des votes ethniques, essentiellement.
Due to the ethnic vote. In other words, non-French and non-English immigrant people to French Canada, they voted no, and if it wasn't for them, basically Quebec would have separated from Canada. Understand this. In other words, according to Jacques Parizeau, it's because of immigrants, non-white immigrants to Canada, that Canada is still Canada. Otherwise, it would have broken into two separate countries in 1995. And as usual, everything that Tariq Fateh says is basically factually wrong. When Tariq Fateh says that every conservative in Brampton is a Hindu and every liberal is a Sikh, again, as you would expect, this is simply factually wrong. If you go to the Conservative Party of Canada's website, you will see that the candidates that they're going to be fielding in Brampton in the upcoming elections are also Sikh, because Brampton is largely a Sikh area. So for example, there's Ramona Singh, who will be running in Brampton East. I'm assuming that she's Sikh. I'm not 100%, but Singh oftentimes usually is a Sikh name. There's Pawanjit Gosal, who's going to run in Brampton Center. And there's Ramandeep Brar, who's going to run in Brampton South. So these are the candidates that the Conservative Party will be fielding in Brampton in the upcoming elections. And these are Sikh people, or easily 2 out of the 3 are. Now, if it seems as if I'm jumping from point to point and there's no connection, that's because that's exactly what Tariq Fateh did in his lecture at Ideacity. He does not stick to any one point. It's all red herrings. He's jumping from here to there to there. Basically, any and all complaints against the Muslim community that possibly enters his mind, he's just spitting it out. And there's no rhyme or reason or connection in his thought pattern. Let's see what he says next.
I can't be acceptable to anyone, neither could friends like columnist Farzana Hassan or Asra Numani or any one of these people who are the real victims of Islamofascism and who are cheering the Quebec ban on hijab, etc., burqa. But you won't read that in the newspaper, unless, of course, if you buy today's Toronto Sun. I get a commission for wholesale, but I have a column there explaining this. Most Muslims in Quebec hailed the decision. The newspapers went out and said, nah, they don't look like Muslims. Who? The deputy speaker of the Quebec National Assembly, Fatma Huda Pepin, a Muslim. She left the Liberal Party because her colleagues said they really love to see women in chador sitting next to them in Parliament. It's so diverse. She left the Liberal Party. She left politics. She condemned it. The North African Muslim organization, the French-speaking Muslims in Quebec, hailed the decision. You pick up the Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, National Post. What do you find? Muslims are upset.
Does this even make sense to you? Without even checking this, do you think that the majority of Muslims in Quebec hailed the decision to ban what he originally called the hijab? He kind of corrects himself and then says the burqa or the veil. Is that something that makes sense to you? Do you think that the majority of Muslims would support a ban on the veil? He says that the North African Muslim organization there in Quebec supports the ban. But who is this North African Muslim organization? He doesn't name this organization. And in a column that he wrote for the Toronto Sun, he mentions 23 modernist, reformist type of Muslims that he's friends with who support the ban on the veil in Quebec. So how did these 23 individuals become the majority of Muslims in Quebec, or the North African Muslim Organization of Quebec, when he's just talking about 23 individuals? So again, brothers and sisters, he's cooking up the facts. He's fudging the facts, and he's cooking up things, and he's pulling them out of thin air. This is what he does.
Do you recall the 3 million dead in Bangladesh, slaughtered by the Pakistan army because they were not Muslim enough?
This is ridiculous. I mean, that civil war, or the war for independence for Bangladesh that happened between Pakistan and Bangladesh, which at that time was West Pakistan and East Pakistan, it was not because West Pakistan saw the East Pakistanis as not Muslim enough. So again, Tariq Fateh is cooking up the fact. It's well known that there were a lot of economic reasons, there were linguistic reasons, there were ethnic tensions between West Pakistan and East Pakistan. West Pakistan is mostly Punjabi and Urdu speaking. East Pakistan, or Bangladesh, was majority Bengali. So there were ethnic divisions, there were ethnic tensions, there were economic disputes. Does religion get thrown in as an ingredient somewhere in there? Yes, of course. Bad politicians make use of pseudo-religious militias to do some of their dirty work. That kind of thing happens. But no one categorizes the West Pakistan versus Bangladesh conflict as a religious conflict, let alone as primarily a religious conflict. Only Tariq Fateh does that. The other thing is, with all due respect and love to my brothers and sisters in Bangladesh, the estimates differ. The estimates differ of how many people were killed in that war. Even Bangladeshi historians have different estimates. So the estimates go anywhere from 50,000 on the low end up to 3 million on the high end. Tariq Fateh, of course, goes with the 3 million estimate because that works in his favor, and he wants to sow discord between Muslims and make Muslims look as bad as possible.
Do you know what is happening in honor killings in Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, in Saudi Arabia?
Again, you can see there's no rhyme or reason to Tariq Fateh's thoughts. He jumps from point to point to point. None of them are connected. Now we suddenly mention honor killings in Pakistan, Iran, in Turkey. Interestingly, he forgets to mention honor killings in India, perhaps because he's a big hit in India, perhaps because he gets paychecks from India, where he's a big darling of the right-wing Hindus.
You remember the Saudi girl who came here 2 months ago? We raised money for her. As soon as she landed over here, she disappeared. You don't remember the one who went to Bangkok, then got to South Korea? 3 of us raised $10,000, got her here, presented the money, and then boom, disappeared. No sight of her.
I can't help but laugh. I mean, that's just sweet. An ex-Muslim conning some fake Muslims like Tariq Fateh. That's just funny. Anyhow, brothers, you've seen how he cooks up a lot of references. He gets his facts all wrong, and he does this again and again and again. And you wonder, where does he get his facts from? Where does he get his information from? Where does he get his references from? These were a lot of random facts that probably don't matter to you on a day-to-day basis. They don't really pertain to me, or they're not relevant to me on a day-to-day basis. So what was the point of the video? The point of this video was to show you that even if you're going to be anti-Islam, even if you're going to be anti-Muslim, at least be anti-Muslim for good reasons. Be anti-Islam for good reasons. Search out good reasons. Don't take your facts and don't take your information from someone like Tariq Fateh, because he's not reliable. He gets his facts wrong. And I've shown you where he gets his facts wrong.
Next time you meet a journalist, take a cake and slam it into his face, because that's what he deserves. Thank you very much.
I think Tariq Fateh forgets that he is a journalist, and I think he forgets that his daughter Natasha Fateh is a journalist for the CBC. So does he really want me to take a cake and to smash it in his face? Anyhow, this YouTube video was my version of throwing a pie in your face, Tariq Fateh.